Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Dingell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get to my remarks, and it's great to see the Secretary here, I'd like to ask for a unanimous consent request to enter into the record a report from the nonpartisan Cato Institute. There have been many people making arguments this morning that illegal immigrants are smuggling drugs across the border and contributing to the fentanyl crisis, wreaking havoc across the country. This report debunks some of the rhetoric and distortions we've heard this morning about fentanyl. To quote the report, here are the facts. In 2021, U.S. citizens were 86.3% of convicted fentanyl drug traffickers, 10 times greater than convictions of illegal immigrants for the same offense. Over 90% of fentanyl seizures occur at legal crossing points or interior vehicle checkpoints, not on illegal migration routes. So U.S. citizens who are subject to less scrutiny when crossing legally are who are more often the smugglers. Just 0.02% of the people arrested by Border Patrol for crossing illegally possessed any fentanyl whatsoever. Annual deaths from fentanyl nearly doubled from 219 to 221. I had a family member myself who I lost. After the previous administration banned most travel and asylum, and the fact that so many Americans are dying from fentanyl is a tragedy. We all need to care about it. But let's not scapegoat asylum seekers or shift blame on where some of the problem is. And I'd like to insert this.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you. I'm going to now, because I did that, have a shorter period of time. One of the priorities that, and you're doing a great job today. I'm sure you would rather be at the dentist office having some really awful work. But one priority we share are our wildlife refuges, which are an integral part of conservation programs in the United States. Our refuges conserve 850 million acres of federal lands and waters that help manage, conserve, and restore fish, wildlife, and their habits. You know, you visited it, my district's home to America's only international wildlife refuge. The Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge has islands, wetlands, marshes, shoals, and waterfront lands along the Detroit River. It's the last undeveloped mile along the river. It supports over 300 species of birds. Unfortunately, refuge managers have been juggling many responsibilities with small budgets for too long. The refuge system's budget has seen nearly no change since 2010. When accounting for inflation, it has less funding capacity now than it did 15 years ago. And despite a 36% increase in visitors since 2010, full-time refuge employees have decreased by 16%. Only half of the 500 refuge field stations are staffed, so we're only able to monitor less than a third of the over 1,300 threatened and endangered species found in the refuges. Madam Secretary, I have a few questions. About how many visitors come to the refuges every year?
It's upwards of 68 million visitors.
And how has the budget shortfall impacted how the refuges can be used and enjoyed by Americans?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for this line of questioning. Our over 500 wildlife refuges, as you know, play an important role in conservation. The refuge system delivers recreational, ecological, economic benefits to local communities of all sizes. Recreational visits to the refuge system also generate over $3 billion for local communities. Local economies, and over 41,000 jobs across our nation. Those are all important byproducts of a healthy refuge system, and of course we recognize that we make the most out of limited staffing, funding, and other resources. We do the best we can, but it is valuable. Our wildlife refuges are valuable gems in our national culture.
So our colleagues across the aisle often complain that the Endangered Species Act isn't recovering species as quickly as they would like. But national wildlife refuges are an integral part of the recovery plans, and they're severely underfunded. How does a lack of ESA recovery funding plus a lack of refuge funding hinder species recovery? Can you provide an example?
Thank you so much for that question as well. And I mean, I'm thinking right now as you're talking about a wildlife refuge I visited in Wyoming. There's a toad there that almost went extinct, and were it not for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the dedicated staff ensuring that what little resources they had went to this project, we would add another species to the list of species that went extinct. So when extinction means forever, they say that all the time. We just finished our 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, and I am proud of the dedicated staff every day who recognize the value that these species bring to our world.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm out of time and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ladies, time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. I can't help but be here with you and think about, with fond memories, serving together with you here in Congress. Thank you for your work and thank you for being here. Now, that said, you know that I'm going to bring up a sore subject in Utah. It's the BLM landscape and conservation rule has once again irritated the wound that makes Utahns feel like they're neglected and that people here in Washington have it out for them, adding further divide to something that's always already divided. And let me be clear, I believe Utah's farmers and ranchers have cared for this land for generations and generations. They want to leave it better than they found it and have done a fantastic job at that. Yet this takes just another poke at them. And these are the people who are most impacted by your rule. I know there have been some comments today about the impressive groups of letters that have flooded the messages that they want to support this. And I feel like it's a little bit like bragging about the Valentine's cards you got when you asked people to send them to you. More importantly, 1 million artificial messages aren't worth one comment from somebody who actually lives on this land. And to that point, I wrote you a letter last year asking you to have a listening session in Utah before this rule was implemented. Let me remind everybody, I know I say this a lot, I just don't think it sinks in. Utah is 66% owned by the federal government. The rural parts of my district are over 90% federally owned. I think everybody needs to think about what it would be like to run a community when 90% of the property is managed by somebody 2,000 miles away. You didn't respond to this request. We got no listening sessions in Utah. Can you tell me why you weren't willing to do that?
Congressman, I will say with respect to the public lands rule that it was a very transparent process where whoever wanted to comment publicly was able to do so. And I feel very confident that the staff that we have in Utah is very close with the local community there. We saw that when I visited your state on several occasions. And I feel confident that those local communities have complete access to the BLM staff.
Let me agree with you. We do love your BLM staff on the ground. They're good people. They integrate into the community, and so they understand the community needs. And that is the problem with people from Washington who don't understand those community needs, and that's where the pushback comes from. Let me go to a term in the rule that says sustainable recreation. The agency uses the term sustainable recreation multiple times, but never defines it. Can you define what is sustainable recreation?
It's my understanding, and please don't quote me on this, even though I'm on the record. Sustainable recreation to me says that we want these outdoor recreation industry to continue to be able to use these areas for recreation.
But that implies there's a non-sustainable recreation. Can you tell me the difference between sustainable and non-sustainable recreation?
I can't at the moment, but I'd be happy to answer that for the record.
Yeah, we would love to know that. I mean, people on the ground are wondering, what does sustainable recreation mean? Let me also then go to the rule is not intended to prevent or decrease recreation, and that word intend is very bothersome to me. How do we know how to get that gets interpreted? And then let me just a little bit more. One paragraph lower, you say the BLM clarified mitigation language that would allow for renewable energy and development or other kinds of projects, even when that development produces unavoidable impacts. That isn't multiple use. That sounds like a hierarchy to me. The rule literally says renewable supersedes conservation as a use, and conservation can supersede recreation. Help me understand that language.
Congressman, with your permission, I would like to pass to Acting Deputy Secretary Daniel Davis to answer that question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Congressman, thank you for the question. And I think I would not agree with your characterization and reading, and I'm not saying you have it wrong. I'm saying that the intent is not to suggest that. I think the BLM in that instance was trying to provide examples to be more clear that the public lands rule and what is set forth provides a process to assure
balance. We're going to run out of time, but let me read this again. Renewable energy development or other kinds of projects, even when that development produces unavoidable impacts. Why does it say renewable and nothing else?
I think they were seeking to provide an example, and it's not meant to suggest that other multiple uses are not situated in the same manner.
So what is the purpose of the rule if the projects supersede conservation?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
We're out of time, but I just want to make the point there is no purpose for the rule if projects that want to be done supersede the rule, which is how I'm reading this language.
I'm sorry, I really don't understand the question. I do want to reaffirm that the rule is meant to assure that multiple use in practice can continue through the decades and through generations.
I am out of time. I'll yield. I'll just simply say it says renewable energy will supersede. So that's not clear to me.
Gentlemen's time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Haaland, I first want to thank you for your recent visit to my district and for touring the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge with me. We are very fortunate to have this land set aside both as a critical habitat for migratory birds and also as a space for our community to enjoy nature. During your visit, I learned about ecosystem restoration at the refuge, and my first question to you, Secretary, is about Interior's approach on these issues. So the question is, how is Interior working to restore ecosystems on federal lands, and how do these efforts ensure benefits for both conservation and recreation?
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting us at that beautiful refuge. It was just amazing. The Don Edwards, we continued to have conversations even after we left you, and it was really wonderful. I'm immediately thinking about our Keystone initiatives. We have areas, it's like across the country, we have certain areas where we are working to restore landscapes in various areas that are Keystone initiatives. For example, the bison on our grasslands. I apologize. I am so cold right now that it's hard for me to concentrate on anything else. Forest birds in Hawaii, salt marshes on the East Coast. These are all ways that we are working to make sure that our ecosystems are restored. And that means that connecting these places around the country means that we all can work together and make sure that these landscapes last into the future for future generations.
And as you saw, my district, we're surrounded by the San Francisco Bay on one side, Pacific Ocean on the other side. So our communities are very aware of the dangers posed by sea level rise due to climate change. California has already experienced roughly 8 inches of sea level rise over the past century, and current projections predict an additional 10 to 12 inches over the next 30 years. So I want to thank you for Interior's $2 million in funding for climate resilience projects, specifically at that refuge. So, Secretary, could you share with us some of the recent impacts of sea level rise on Interior lands and assets, and what are some approaches Interior plans to use to mitigate flooding on public lands?
Thank you so much. I want to say yes on Interior lands, but also on tribal lands as well. Sea level rise, nobody can escape that. And the Quinault Nation in Washington State, for example, is working to move their entire traditional village inland about 4 miles because of this issue. So we're supporting tribes when they have to move in this way. And we are working to do whatever we can. There are a number of sites around the country that are currently being impacted by that sea level rise and storm surge, as you mentioned. The building over the USS Arizona at the Pearl Harbor National Memorial is experiencing greater strain due to rising sea levels. Here in D.C., the work to rehab the seawalls at the tidal basin, I think the cherry trees that need to be pulled out got the most new media around the country, but we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that. In Florida, the National Key Deer Wildlife Refuge is sinking due to sea level rise. In South Carolina, the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge. All of these areas, we have to pay attention. There are a lot of birds that nest on land in these areas. If it's flooded, we don't have the next generation of seabirds. So there's a lot at stake with this issue, and that's why everything we're doing, from renewable energy to landscape restoration to the work on in these areas, it helps immensely.
Thank you for your leadership on all of those fronts, Madam Secretary. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Madam Secretary, I will say that a lot of things change over time, but the temperature in this room is not one of those things. It's consistently cold in here.
Mr. Chair, may I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record emails from the Voice, the regional tribe of the Arctic, by Doreen Levitt. She's the Director of Natural Resources. It was dated October 13th of 7:02 p.m., requesting a meeting with the Secretary, and a response 3 days later. Unfortunately, Secretary Haaland is unable to join the meeting. I'd like to enter that into the record, please.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Duarte, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield back to the chair for a short time.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Secretary, you mentioned earlier that you have not been to the border, and I've been to the border many times, and the fact that 35% of the border is federal lands, I think, is a good reason for us to go, and it's a reason why we held a field hearing in Arizona along the southern border. And my question to you is, do you have plans to go to the border, or will you commit to go to the border just to see and understand what's down there? Because it's shocking to me every time I go.
Congressman, thank you for that question. I do want to tell you, and we recognize there. In fact, I think in this committee we had a hearing about our national parks and refuges that are on the border. So yes, there are a lot of important wildlife and landscapes in that area. I want you to know that the DOI has a strong working relationship with other federal agencies in the southwest border area.
But my question, and I need to yield back to Mr. Duarte, will you go to the border?
Congressman, I can't answer that at the moment, but I'm happy to take that request back to my scheduling staff, and we will be happy to let you know.
I hope you will make that a top priority. And I'd also like to point out that CBP's fentanyl seizures have increased more than 800% since fiscal year 2019. And our fiscal year 2023 seizures of fentanyl, as reported by CBP, have already surpassed the fiscal year 2022 seizure. So it's a massive problem, and everybody knows the fentanyl is coming across the southern border. I yield back to Mr. Duarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here with us today. I'm a freshman. I'm from California, farming district. I do a lot of resource work. We rely on a lot of natural resources. As Secretary of Interior, do you recognize your important role in rural community development? Do you realize that resource utilization, whether it be fisheries, forestry, water on the farms, drilling American oil, providing American energy, is really the backbone of economics for rural America and keeping the American dream alive with affordability and opportunity?
Yes, rural communities are incredibly important. And in fact, I represented rural communities when I was in this committee.
Well, I've got a few specific questions because I'm highly confused. I think what we see in America today is what I would call resource abandonment, complete abandonment of our natural resources at many different turns that are really hammering the American dream for many people in my district and many families throughout America, whether they be lobstermen in Maine or farmers in the Valley. Let's use the Valley for an example. Our reservoirs, after 2 robust years of rain, very, very heavy rainfall and snowpack years, the reservoirs are over 90% full, most of them 95+% full, just keeping a little bit of flood space and managing their levels. But downstream, we see water allocations from the Bureau of Reclamation under your charge at 35%. We see downstream, offstream storage at San Luis Reservoir at with 500,000 acre feet left to fill it as we get towards the end of our runoff season. What are you doing here? Why are we not getting this water on the farms? Why are we not getting it for municipal and industrial use? Why are we letting our critical natural resource go to waste?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And I look forward to you having the opportunity to speak with Camille Tootin, who will be in front of this committee sometime this month, I believe. She is the expert on the water in California. I recognize that yes, there were several good years, lots of 2 great winners. However, my understanding is that we have to plan for the future, and I know that that Reclamation is working to maximize storage and groundwater recharge in these areas. We're incorporating the best science into the operations.
Yeah, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry. I see that you're reading something that you're handed there. That's great. You're not planning for the future. These dams are 92% full. We've got farms that need this water to produce crops this year. At the end of the season, come summer, we'll be dumping a very large amount of this water into the rivers to create flood control space in these same Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineering dams. And this water will be wasted after the farmers have already made their crop plans and missed their opportunity to prosper from it. So I don't know how you're planning for any other than a dystopian future, quite honestly.
Gentlemen, his time has expired. The chair
Yield back.
recognizes
Thank
the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Madam Secretary, for being here and laying out all the great work that the Department of Interior has been doing. I'd like to recognize also that in the 117th Congress, when Democrats were in control, President Biden signed into law magnificent bills that have led to the largest investment in rural America basically since the New Deal and electrification. And a lot of those amazing investments in rural America, which are making the difference so that we can have kind of work in rural America that ranges from recreation, which often occurs on lands that you oversee, to renewable energy, to your new rule, which is going to be a benefit to ranchers, right? That there are many ways in which we can have economic development in rural America and on lands that the public owns and that belong to the public. So I really want to thank the fact that your agency has been implementing those laws with great effect. I also want to recognize that in this hearing room, we've had some of your assistant secretaries come and talk about the great work they're doing with more 638 contracts, right, that are being processed, but really no more staff. Like you have the same amount of staff doing a lot more work. And you were kind of understaffed and overworked, and we appreciate how you were rising to that occasion. So thank you for doing that. I want to talk a little bit about something that we dealt with on the floor regarding the 1872 Hard Rock Mining Law. The date tells you everything. 1872. It is old. It needs updating. Unfortunately, the updates that have come out of this committee would make it easier for mining corporations, foreign mining corporations, China, for example, to actually mine our resources. And we have seen the effect of that in New Mexico. You've seen, as you've driven home, as I've driven home, the piles, the tailings, and the effects. I hiked to the Pecos watershed. where we had such a abandoned mine and where we are looking at the possibility of withdrawal. The Forest Service is reviewing that. And we want to make sure that if the Forest Service sends you that information, that in fact the Department of Interior will work quickly to analyze it to make a determination. Because that river flows not just from New Mexico, but it flows down through New Mexico into Texas, and those waters are important for agriculture, as was just pointed out. These waters are essential for our rural economies and keeping them clean. So with regards to reviewing if there is a request for a mineral withdrawal, you'll be able to act swiftly upon that.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And of course, we take our obligations to manage the public lands and waters on behalf of all Americans very seriously and recognize that some lands warrant special protection. I'm happy to know that you go there personally and enjoy those lands. Withdrawals often build upon decades of efforts by local stakeholders, local communities, people just like you who like to be on those lands. And so I would like to say that the principles of President Biden's America the Beautiful initiatives to support this locally led and voluntary conservation and restoration efforts we pay attention to those immensely. And I understand that the Pecos watershed is a special place, and if requested by the Forest Service, we'll work diligently to consider the request.
Thank you. I want to while we're on water, I want to talk about an issue that I think affects many of us in this committee on both sides of the aisle of the need to get to Indian water rights settlements. As we know, those water rights settlements come out of decades, sometimes half a century of negotiations or litigation, and we're moving away from litigation to try to get to settlements. And we know that they're very difficult because water is life, agua es vida. They mean everybody, right? Whatever state you're in, but especially in the Midwest, has to make compromises. The department included a proposal for $2.5 billion in mandatory water funding for Indian water rights settlement. We have very little time, but can you speak to why this is important to have that much money in there?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Reliable water is crucial to tribal communities, and this permanent funding for settlements will help us work with tribes and Congress to meet our trust responsibilities to ensure that tribal communities receive the water resources they have long been promised.
Well, thank you, and I have run out of time. Thank you for such a quick answer, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing.
Ladies, time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, it's good to see you here today. Your written testimony highlights the facts that the department is the steward of 20% of America's land, and in that capacity serves critical roles for the nation, including generating jobs, supporting local economic growth, and managing important national and cultural resources. Now, as a business owner myself, I like to think of your budget kind of like as a Bible. I think it speaks volumes about your values, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. And while it may not always be pretty to look at how we prioritize our spending, I do think it says a lot about who we are. And in any budget, just like in any business, there will be things that we agree on and things that we don't. And that's okay. But frankly, as part of my job here, both in traveling across my district and across this country, as part of this committee, I get the privilege, much like you, of listening to people and hearing what is working, what they like, and a lot more times what they don't like. So in your budget, I'm also seeing some things that are concerning. Your written testimony also devotes a significant amount of space to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is both for underserved communities and employees at the department as part of its ongoing equity action plan. The department's budget calls for a number of program budget increases among various bureaus to achieve its goal related to the equity action plan, which is, my understanding, just was recently updated. To start, Madam Secretary, I would like to clarify, just a simple yes or no would be good. The department does require its employees to abide by all federal laws regarding equal employment, civil rights, and anti-discrimination practices, correct?
Yes, we follow all the laws, Congressman.
Okay, good. We got that straight. So the mission of the department is to protect and manage the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage, provides scientific and other information about these resources, and honors its trust, responsibilities, or special commitments to American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and affiliated island communities. Now, I don't see anything in the mission statement about DEI or even environmental justice, which I know you're going to tell me is a direct order from President Biden because of his executive order. But let's get back to the budget, because to me that's where the rubber meets the road. We need to be talking about priorities here. At the same time, you're endorsing a budget that asks for millions of dollars to require staff to do more DEI training. You'll also sign off on a blanket lease to house migrants on parkland in New York City and not worry about the impact that could have on the park employees there. Am I correct with that?
Congressman, you are correct that there is a contract
Thank you.
between...
And just for the record, the community surrounding the Floyd benefit field area using CEQ's own screening tool has a number of both environmental and social justice issues, none of which seemed to be a concern for the department in practice when it came to waiving environmental standards and signing a lease. You know, instead of increasing programming for DEI classes for staff, while at the same time complaining that you need more money to hire staff, there are times in life when we need to figure out how to prioritize. And Madam Secretary, I say that because of this. We're in high inflation right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to stagflation. And your department is directly responsible for not issuing leases for offshore drilling right now. And that can provide 15% of the oil that's needed. You're also dragging your feet on LNG permits to the point where the DOE had to pause LNG. So you're not only harming Americans, you're harming our allies. And you're also emboldening Russia, who is our enemy, who is going to be selling that LNG to Europe. And you're also emboldening Iran, which was held to 400,000 barrels a day, and now they're producing over 3 million barrels a day to sell it, where we should be doing that and have our own energy independent. With that, I don't think I have time to yield to you, Mr. I'll yield 30 seconds.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, what percentage of the Biden administration's policies are responsible for the record gas and oil development that you mentioned earlier?
I'm not sure I understand the exact question.
How many oil and gas leases will be held in the Gulf of Mexico fiscal year 24-25?
There will be 3.
3. Do you think that's adequate?
Congressman, we're following the law, and I will just say we're following the law, and we're having 3.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yield.
You didn't issue any. You're not planning on issuing any this year.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. There's no time to yield. Who are we yielding? What's going on here?
I've been gracious with people's time. I'll keep that in mind when you go, Mr. Huffman.
I counted the 56 extra seconds.
You're being sued because you didn't issue leases now. And we had a hearing here earlier to where somebody representing you said that they weren't going to reissue any leases this year, and probably not next year as well.
The gentleman's time has expired.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
That question can hopefully be answered for the record. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Porter, for 5 minutes.
Secretary Haaland, my colleagues across the aisle have leveled some strong accusations against the Department of Interior today. I am an avid national park visitor. I have been to, I think, 33 and counting, including about 12 since I've served on this committee. These accusations against the National Park Service and your management of it are really concerning. I can't in good conscience drive my minivan with its oversight license plate onto these national parks unless we dissect these allegations. First, Republicans on this committee have accused the National Park Service of providing inaccurate and unreliable backlog figures when accounting for deferred maintenance. They have cited mismanagement, waste, and fraud. What methodology are you using to determine cost estimates for the national parks maintenance backlog, and is it in line with standards used across the government?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. In fiscal year 21, the department transitioned away from estimating deferred maintenance cost estimates based on work orders. We revised our methodology and are now consistently estimating deferred maintenance across the bureaus. We're using accepted industry standard approaches to generate our current estimates.
So, are there any uncontrollable factors that the department accounts for when determining the remaining costs of deferred maintenance?
As you noted, we have national parks all over the country. Many of those are old. They have historical buildings and historical inventories on those. Sometimes, yes, it takes a lot more of work to find the carpenters and workers that can work on these historical inventories, such as the ones that we have across the country.
And of course, many of these deferred maintenance projects are also in remote locations. The maintenance work requires things that have been impacted by supply chain problems. Extreme weather like a fire or a flood, I know, can not only create new maintenance issues, it could also halt the plan for planned maintenance. So it seems to me like you're using accurate, consistent calculations that are widely accepted across the government. So I want to go to the second claim that I heard my colleagues make. They said that the Department of Interior lacks strategic planning and coordination. And they have cited in the past a September 2023 Office of Inspector General report that did identify numerous weaknesses in the National Park Service deferred maintenance process going back as far as 1999. So these were pretty long-term problems. Secretary Haaland, that report, that September 2023 Inspector General report, included several recommendations for the National Park Service to address and improve its deferred maintenance process. Has the National Park Service addressed or begun to address those recommendations?
Yes, of course. And I want to assure you, Congresswoman, that the NPS maintenance program is very strong. We had a very complex portfolio of 75,000 assets, from Yosemite's Ahwahnee Hotel to Mount Rushmore to the Washington Monument. There is never a one-size-fits-all for any of these, as I mentioned earlier. And estimates now comply with DOI policy and require less time for field staff to develop. So we're working on all of those issues to make sure that we can do it in the right way. And in fact,
in January 2024, the GAO also released a new report on the department's deferred maintenance backlog. What did that report find?
The GAO found that the department was managing the deferred maintenance backlog and selecting projects for LRF funding appropriately.
So we've seen huge improvement. There was a problem. The Department of Interior addressed it, and they addressed it promptly. We see a lot of recommendations that go unaddressed for years. In this case, the agency acted quickly, and the GAO has already told us that there is progress being made. I want to move to the final claim, which is that the department, and this is so ironic as you've been sitting here for hours with your very competent staff, that the department is somehow not engaging with Congress for us to conduct oversight of this deferred maintenance. What do you say to that allegation?
I want to say that our door is open, and in fact, if any member of Congress requests a phone call from any one of us, we work hard to meet that request in a timely manner.
So I think your department's also held some staff briefings. I mean, it seems to me that the Republicans are focused on the wrong problems. Secretary Haaland, I just want to close by asking, did Congress increase or cut the National Park Service's budget in 2024?
Congress cut the National Park Service's budget in fiscal year 24.
And did that help the National Park Service deal with its deferred maintenance backlog?
Budget cuts never help us.
So the real problem here is budget cuts. The department has the right system, they have the right accounting, but they can't do those projects if they don't have the resources. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, is it the department's practice to use, my time is still here.
Gentlelady, suspend.
We're going to reset the clock.
And please reset the clock.
We'll have fun later, Jared. Secretary Haaland, is it the department's practice to use the best available science in rulemaking? Science, data, facts?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, we always work to
Will you commit to using the best available science, meaning the 2016 USGS study, when finalizing the Colorado River Field Office and Grand Junction Field Office RMP?
We will. We always work to use the best science available, Congresswoman.
I would disagree, but last summer, the department issued a draft resource management plan to lock up 1.6 million acres from responsible oil and gas production in Colorado and in my district. Unfortunately, the analysis in the draft RMP relies on an outdated USGS study from 2002 instead of a more up-to-date analysis conducted in 2016. So, Secretary Haaland, how is locking up 1.6 million acres out of 1.9 million acres from oil and gas production, how is this going to ensure lands are managed for multiple use and sustained yield?
Congresswoman, I'm not quite sure specifically which acres you're referring to.
1.6 million acres in western Colorado. And it sounds like this is just another strategy the department is employing to lock up more lands across the West and undermine American energy dominance. Now, are you not familiar with the monument designation that's being proposed?
Are you talking of
I'm talking about 1.6 million acres, and it's kind of...
Are you speaking of the Thompson Divide area?
I am not. So, Secretary Haaland, I strongly oppose this misguided effort by extremists to designate this national monument in the Dolores River corridor and its surrounding areas in southwest Colorado. And it's very concerning that you're not familiar with what's going on. The senators have had press conferences there. There's been public comment. I have constituents like Sean Pond who are talking about this each and every day and reaching out to your offices without a response, trying to protect these lands for multiple use. And they're being absolutely ignored on this. And, I have a letter here for you. And typically when I do send letters, I get some sort of half response from staff. And so I would like to hand this to you directly today.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland. And with this letter, there's more information about this monument. And I want to just iterate here that Senator Bennett and I, we have a bipartisan community-led bill to protect the Dolores River corridor without a national monument designation. And I need you to commit to Coloradans to working with us on this particular bill and oppose this unilateral land grab that will cause harm to the people who live there. And I just want to say, disregarding the agreements that have been achieved on a bipartisan basis and the much time that has been invested in this Dolores NCA, this would be a complete insult to Southwest Colorado, and it would contradict the DOI's direct description of the Antiquities Act, which I have quoted there in my letter. And so, Secretary Haaland, the department is asking for an additional $2.8 million. You know what? I'm not even going to go into this right now. I mean, this is just more DOI and civil rights issues, but I really want to stay focused on the land here. But I need to know that you are looking into this issue, are familiar with the 1.6 million acre land grab that is being proposed, and will have conversations and responses to actually working on this bipartisan Dolores NCA that the senators of Colorado and I have been diligently working on with stakeholders who are local and familiar with this area to prevent this national monument land grab, this designation.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the letter. I will read it when I get back to my office. I also am happy to know that you're working with your senators. As you know, I've been to Colorado many, many times. We care about your state, and I appreciate your hard work.
We care about our state, and we care about the multiple uses that take place on our public lands. This is the people's land. And at every turn, the federal government is trying to lock up more and prevent this multiple use, prevent the mineral resources from being produced, prevent recreation. And this designation is going to further harm Western Colorado. And just while I have you in my last few seconds, you've made multiple references to the 30 by 30 land and water grab in your testimony. How much taxpayer money does your department plan to spend or waste this fiscal year in pandering to the enviros in this pursuit of this radical initiative?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The America the Beautiful initiative is just that. It's an initiative. It's not a line item in our budget whatsoever, but we feel that the work that we're doing essentially moves the initiative forward.
I do
just... Time has expired.
America the Beautiful, locking up land and water from sea to shining sea.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kamlager-Dove, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary. I just have to commend you on your grace and your temperament. I am sure that your ancestors are proud. They're probably meditating, hoping that you get out of here soon. So I have some clarifying questions for you. So 90% of fentanyl is coming through ports of entry. Does the Department of the Interior have jurisdiction over ports of entry?
No, Congresswoman. No, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't think so. Okay, so tell me this. Does DOI have jurisdiction over the containment and or the enforcement of controlled substances?
No, we do not.
Okay, I didn't think so. Is your department also responsible for busing in and transporting these migrants into New York and all over the country?
No, that is not under our mission.
I didn't think so. Is DOI responsible for sending troops overseas? There had been some articulation earlier in this committee that somehow you are responsible for sending troops to Iran.
No.
Okay. So I didn't think so. My colleagues have also been adamant about you taking over Mayorkas's job. I know that women often do so much more than men. That is true, but I don't think you want that job. Can you remind us, for the record, the mission of your department, and can you also share with us where you have traveled across this country?
Thank you very much, Vice Chairwoman. And yes, the mission of the department is to manage our public lands, to protect our cultural resources and cultural heritage for every American, also to uphold the trust and treaty obligations of our nation's 574 federally recognized tribes.
Thank you. Are you also actively preventing recreation from happening across this great country?
Not at all. And in fact, I feel confident that our outdoor recreation industry has grown since President Biden has been in office.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so my Republican colleagues have continuously been complaining about the dwindling oil production that is happening on public lands in this country. Is there legitimacy to these complaints?
Vice Chairwoman, it's undeniable that U.S. oil production on public lands and waters is at an all-time high, and that is verifiable information on a website.
I love facts. I do love science and data. Thankfully, so do you. Madam Secretary, a lot has been said about your leasing policies. So can you confirm the amount of leased acres and permits that have been approved but are not being used?
Thank you very much for the question. I will say that there are millions of acres of leased non-producing federal lands, and there are thousands of approved permits to drill that the industry is letting sit unused. We'd be happy to work out a specific number for you if you would like that.
Thank you, because I don't want you saying anything from the hip. Is it true that the Department of the Interior has recently finalized a number of important rules that will both promote clean energy and also ensure stronger protections for our public lands and waters while holding fossil fuel industry accountable?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And in my last remaining moments, I have to say I've been getting Killers of the Flower Moon vibes up here in this committee today when it comes to some of the tribal interrogatory questions that have been asked of you. Incredibly offensive, foul. You did say, I'd like you to reiterate that you have been hearing from tribal communities and that they are not a monolithic group. Is this true?
Yes.
And can you just share why is the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative so important to the tribal community?
Well, first of all, I believe very strongly that it helps tribes to heal. This was a horrific era of our country's history. It's a history that every single American shares and that every single American should know about. On our road to healing, we were able to essentially find out the priorities of tribes and how they want to move forward with this issue. And as I mentioned earlier, native language revitalization is one of those areas, and we're very proud to support that in tribes in the way they want to move their native language revitalization forward.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Ladies, time's expired. The chair
Mr.
recognizes
Chairman,
the gentleman.
I'd like to ask for unanimous consent. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article that is titled Tribes Worry About Police Staffing, Not Cartels. It's from Indian Country Today, and it's an appropriate item to introduce after the Vice Chair's questions, because it's really about the hearing that we had a few weeks ago in which tribal leaders talked to us about their public safety concerns, not border issues. The other thing I want to just note is that the Department of the Interior has had unprecedented consultation with tribes during this administration and consults with tribes daily on every possible issue you can imagine. So the accusations that we've heard today are just absolutely false.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado.
I ask unanimous consent to submit the letter that was handed to Secretary Deb Haaland into the record, and I won't go through and make a speech with my request.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Secretary Haaland, can you tell me who owns our lands under the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior?
The American people.
Thank you. Can you tell me the mission of the Department of Interior as it relates to these natural resources and to the scientific information that you put out?
Yes, it's to manage those public lands and essentially make sure that the cultural heritage and all of that is there for the American people.
Specifically, the mission says to conserve and manage the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage for the benefit and enjoyment of the American people. It doesn't say for some, it says for the American people, to provide scientific and other information about natural resources and natural hazards to address societal changes and create opportunities for the American people. It doesn't say for some. Let me ask you, when you look at how you regulate, is it in the interest of all American people, or is it in interest groups that happen to be louder than other aspects? And do the policies that specifically limit access to the owners of these lands that you manage and that in your mission statements say for the American people, not some, when you limit access there, does that take into account all the American people?
Congressman, I wake up every single day, as does my really amazing team and staff of nearly 70,000 career staff. They wake up every day to do their jobs for all Americans.
Okay. So when you make these decisions, your mission says you're about getting science and other information out, but also, I'm assuming, using that in your decisions. Can you tell me when you make a decision to ban lead in ammunition and in fishing sinkers on a large number of refuges, can you cite the science that you use for how there's specific impacts on these properties and the resources on those properties? Because there's nothing that I've seen that's been published or anything out there that has been part of that decision-making.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And the best available science shows that lead ammunition and tackle have negative impacts on wildlife and human health, notably for species
what specific
like eagles.
studies? Yeah, that's a generic answer, Madam Secretary. What specific studies? Can you name the studies and the authors of the studies, the journals that they're published in, to show the risk that's shown scientifically?
I would be more than happy to answer that for the record, Congressman, to make sure that you have those studies.
But you're not aware of the studies, but you'll put those together after the fact.
I can't cite them at the moment, but we'd be happy to give you the scientific approach to all of this if you would like.
Are there other criteria that you use in making decisions about management of Department of Interior properties?
We talk to a lot of people. We make sure that local communities and people that use the land, hunters, anglers, fishers, people who use those lands have opportunities to speak with us. And we actually do hold a lot of roundtable discussions with people around the country.
So if a group comes to you and says, Madam Secretary, we just don't want these people to use the land. We don't like hunters or fishermen. We're anti-hunting or anti-fishing. Do you take their ideas into account in how you develop a management strategy?
I can't say that I know of anyone in this country who would say they don't like hunters or fishers, but...
Madam Secretary, I will give you a whole list of people that do not like hunters and fishermen.
Well, hunters, anglers, outdoor recreation folks, really, we want them to be happy on our public lands, and we take their conversations very seriously, and quite frankly, you know that the Fish and Wildlife Service, that's really their job, is to make sure that we have those resources on our public lands.
So if one of these groups that just says, hey, listen, Madam Secretary, we just don't like these anglers and hunters, we don't want them on the lands, you're saying that none of that goes into any of the decision making, that you look at how these lands are supposed to be managed for the folks that go there to enjoy them, and the folks that said we don't want those people there, you're saying that those either don't get considered or they do get considered?
On the contrary, we're working to make sure that everybody has access to our public lands. Every single American should and must have access to our public lands. That goes for accessibility issues all over our public lands. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is actually expanding hunting and fishing on various refuges. We'd be happy to make sure that you have a status update on that as well.
But when you ban particular types of uses, when you say you can't use lead for hunting and fishing, and all of a sudden you make it unattainable for many people that are on limited incomes, have to deal with high gas prices today and the failure of Bidenomics, the failure there of grocery prices, you're saying it's not a problem to get them to suffer a little bit more and make sure there's additional costs for them to access the lands that they own. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kamlager-Dove, you're recognized.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Appendix B from the Congressional Research Services Report, National Monuments and the Antiquities Act, which shows the historical use of the Monument Authority. Since 1906, all but 3 presidents have used this act to declare at least one monument. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, so ordered. While we're asking unanimous consent, I would like to remind the Secretary that the Department owes this committee responses to over 20 letter requests, and I'm asking unanimous consent to submit each of these outstanding requests for the record, and I would also ask the Secretary to commit to responding to the outstanding document request. Without objection, Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again, Madam Secretary. I think we're almost done here. We have just a little bit of cleanup that I would like to do on this issue of tribal consultation. So you were asked a couple times about a group, Voice of the Inupiat, and whether there was consultation with this particular group. Let me just clarify a few things with you, if I could. That particular group is a nonprofit advocacy group, not a tribal government, correct?
That is my understanding, Congressman.
Yeah. And does the legal requirement to engage in tribal consultation extend to every advocacy group, or is it for tribal government-to-government consultation?
They are government-to-government tribal consultation, and we do send out letters to the actual tribe, and they respond if they're interested in consulting with us.
Right. You've said, and others have said, that tribes are not a monolith, which is certainly true, but it seems like across the aisle, they are a monolith because the only tribal voices they talk to are the ones that want to develop oil and gas or want to support a mining project. But when they are simply part of an advocacy group or maybe some individual member of a tribe, do you personally have an obligation to meet with them and call that tribal consultation? Or is there some confusion, perhaps, about what tribal consultation even is?
Tribal consultation is government-to-government consultation with federally recognized tribes.
And you've been criticized for not personally meeting with this particular advocacy group as well. When the Department of Interior does tribal consultation, are you personally involved in every one of those meetings, or do you sometimes involve other leaders within the department? For example, if BLM is engaged in a rulemaking, would you personally take all the tribal meetings, or is it expected that maybe someone from BLM would take care of that?
Yes, that's correct. Generally, depending upon the issue that is being consulted about, the Assistant Secretary or Bureau leader will meet with the respective tribe and make sure that they are consulting with them on that basis.
All right, thank you. And since my colleagues across the aisle apparently have some short-term memory problems, they have suggested that tribes actually were better consulted under the Trump administration. I do have a unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman. It is to enter into the record an article from Native News Online entitled "Trump's Tribal Record, the Destructive Era." And it explains that during the Trump administration, tribal leaders saw, and I quote, how fast the doors of access were closed to tribes, end quote. The failure to reconvene the White House Tribal Nations Summit was pointed out in this article, and the fact that meaningful tribal consultation was, quote, nearly non-existent, end quote, during the Trump administration. So I would ask that we enter that into the record. And then lastly, because I find it, frankly, just remarkable that my colleagues across the aisle would even deign to ask you any questions about tribal consultation or tribal sovereignty or tribal rights in any regard. I've been in Congress for 12 years, and I have not seen a single time when tribal interests conflicted with an oil and gas development, a pipeline, a mining project, a dam, anything else, where my Republican colleagues did not summarily throw tribes under the bus in favor of those industrial interests. And I want to challenge my colleagues, if they can find a single case where I'm wrong about that, I want to know. I want to know a single time that any of them have ever voted against the interests of a dam or an oil and gas development or a pipeline or a mine or anything else where tribes were opposed to it. Because my experience is they threw the tribes under the bus every single time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank you and your team for your support of my bill last week, H.R. 7377, the Royalty Resiliency Act. Thank you so much for helping us with that. Thank you so much for supporting us in that. I know we don't get to talk about very much bipartisan stuff these days, but again, greatly appreciate it. This legislation will provide a common sense solution to implementing communization agreements and how royalties are paid to the Office of Natural Resources Revenue. So again, greatly appreciating your support for that. While I do support this issue, I do have some concerns that I would like to address today. I said it before, and I will say it again. American offshore oil and gas operations produce the world's cleanest barrel of oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico in the entire world. We do it safer and better than anywhere else. But since day one, this administration and during your tenure, ma'am, have had obstacles placed in the way of American excellence, in my opinion. The American people have repeatedly seen this administration cave to extreme environmental activists. And this administration has placed federal government's thumb on the scale against American oil and gas. And again, we as a country must unleash American energy, not just for us, but for the entire world. I do not want to empower Iran. I do not want to empower Venezuela. I do not want to empower rogue nations. I'm a combat veteran that fought against these extreme and these rogue nations, and I want to make sure that the world is powered by our clean, abundant resources that we have sitting right here in this country in our grasp. And that's kind of what I want to fight for every single day. My first question for you, ma'am, is why has this administration included only 3 offshore oil and gas lease sales in the past 5 years in the past 5-year plan? If you don't mind answering that one.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for the question. BOEM held 11 lease sales under the 2017 to 2022 National OCS leasing program. We had 2 lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico last year, which generated nearly $623 million. And in those sales, we leased approximately 3.3 million acres.
Okay. My next question is, are you familiar with the Copperhead to Loving Pipeline project with BLM?
Are you familiar with it? No. No. Apologize. We'll find out about it, and we'll be happy to contact you after the...
I would really appreciate that. If you don't mind taking a look at that and in good faith, getting back to us, we'd greatly appreciate that. This has been sitting at BLM for almost a year. It's an essential project for this country's domestic supply of oil and gas. If you don't mind, I would really appreciate if you got back to me on that.
We'll be in touch with your staff soon.
Thank you. And then lastly, provisions to the IIJA granted DOI the ability to pursue CCUS in the Gulf of Mexico. It has been 3 years, and the DOI still has not provided guidance. Could you please explain why there has been such a delay in issuing this guidance?
I apologize for that as well. If we could answer that for the record, Congressman, we'd be more than happy to.
That I greatly appreciate it.
We'll have somebody reach out to your staff, and we'll have a conversation about it.
Yes, of course, ma'am. And I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your help on my bill. Yes. And again, I really want to make sure that we don't regulate this industry to oblivion. So whatever we could do to get projects moved forward and get them going, we'll greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. And as I have said several times during this hearing, production is at an all-time high. And our career staff, they're working on the leases, they're working on the permits. This is an ongoing thing since the president has been in office.
And all-time high is great, but again, it needs to be higher. We are not trying to compare ourselves to where we were in the past. I want to absolutely have the maximum amount of energy produced in this country to fuel the world for American excellence, not comparing ourselves to the past, but comparing ourselves to what our capacity can be. Thank you so much for being here. I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a memo from the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs entitled Fact-Checking the Trump Administration's Attempt to Rewrite its Native American Record, False Promises to Tribes. Thank you.
Without objection. Madam Secretary, I want to thank you for your valuable testimony and to the members for their questions today. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses or for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 6th. The hearing record will be open for business 10 days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.